of values and a, lifestyle. And that lifestyle is originated in working class and cross class connections between, working class whites and brown and black people in both the UK and the US. And so for some people, punk is like an elite art school type of movement. But for other people, it's a kind of, it has like, real kind of utopian and, utopian type of possibilities of like, the, when you have the like the cross class cultural production. Punk is about not trying to assimilate and not trying to fit in, and it's about rejecting conformity. So it also for me symbolizes again labor of you know kids not wanting to accept their lot in life, not wanting to accept that they're supposed to live on the dole or live on welfare because they have no future to them. And that was like a big, record label in the UK. Some of my favorite punk is UK 82, which was, hardcore punk that came out of England, out of in the 1980s. Um, and No Future, I think, really like drives home the like bleak future of Thatcher's crush of organized labor, and then Thatcher's prescription for what was possible. It was so bleak, and it's also so I also think there's something there about kids rejecting being told by their parents what to do and their parents' definition of success. So it's more than just collecting records and wearing studded belts and studying your clothes and wearing band t-shirts, which to me like stopped being exciting like in my mid 20s. Like, I um, don't find that lack of depth to it doesn't make me feel anything. So I now more strongly associate my identity in my work, and that is in academia. And I have like flair and style when I dress, but I'm not interested in coming into the classroom in a Motorhead shirt and a like whatever belt buckle and having like my young 20-year-old students relate to me on that level. I actually hate that. I kind of keep my personal, that is now a more personal interest of mine, because it's hard for women queer instructors to get respect in the classroom. I want students to respect me for the ideas I help them think about in the classroom, and not just, oh, my professor is cool, she likes Motorhead. Like, so for me, I actually, like, when I was younger, I would have thought that that would be like untenable. I would have thought that that would have been like selling out or whatever, but I'm actually like, not, the world doesn't need to know like what types of music that listens to. That's not nearly as central in the ways that I think about myself or identify now. And especially because, you know, punk, does have a lot of problems, and it's, a lot of scenes, the ways that you would, dress and perform your like, punkness in society, like is very sexualized for women, and it's like very heterosexualized for women. So that involves like, like, I, that's not very compatible with my work sites now. I want to be taken seriously and I want to be respected. And um, identifying with like punk isn't that compatible with like the things that I want to do. It actually like would limit me. It would like inhibit me, like walking around campus with like little tight mini skirt on and like a studded belt and like a studded vest. That would actually like invite like unwanted attention and unwanted comments. And so that's like a bit interesting. So like I identify only sometimes to other people that are weirdos, where we have like a kinship of weirdos of like, oh, I'm a punk, like, but like my identity like first and foremost is now like, I'm a professor, and I'm a researcher, and I'm an ethnographer. So it's like, those ways are of identifying myself. has expanded my world, whereas just identifying as a punk is way too limiting for me, and it was like suffocating. Like, oh wow, I'm only meeting like 5 like-minded individuals, and they have to like the same bands that I do in order for us to get along. Like, that's a very narrow worldview, and I want more than that. I want more connections with that. Whereas like some people are very much like they're fine with having like only 5 other people in the world that collect the same obscure flexies they collect and that hunt for the same things on Discogs that they collect. And like that's more power to them, but that's not, that's never been me. Small bands, actually all sorts of weird bands would come through this small town, Davis, California, and play house shows and all of that. So I really started to get into punk that way in high school through, this guardian angel. I think, I can't remember, her name was Heather something. And, she gave me a mixtape that is like still one of my favorite mixtapes of all times. That had like a good mix of 77 and 82 punk. And I'm proud of that narrative because the role of women in punk is often imagined to be passive, right? That like, oh, like you just accompany your boyfriend to shows and you hold his jackets and you look at his records and his zines. So that's how you have involvement in punk. So there's this like imagination that women are not agents in their own fucking stories. Sorry for swearing. About, identity, about subcultural participation. And also that imagines them as straight always. And so that could also be said as well about people of color in punk, that again like that inadvertently reifies this imagination that like punk is only white and it's only straight men that get to play and participate in it. It's a boys club. And unfortunately that imagination does the disservice of excluding the, radical women and people of color and queer and trans people of color that have always made punk freaky, that have always been there. I generally am pleased if people perceive me as punk without having to like wear a band shirt and wear like the typical uniform. I would like receiving that recognition of like, oh, she's got, an undercut in her hair and like purpley hair, and she has, these visible tattoos that look pretty cool, and she's wearing this thing that like I don't know what subculture she belongs to, but I can tell she's part of a subculture. That's generally the type of recognition that is very pleasurable if I do receive that from some people, where there's this mutual like, oh hey, you're a weirdo too, that type of kinship, whether that comes from punks or or queers or other types of subcultural members. So it would be primarily first my work, which is academia. So identify as a researcher, as an ethnographer, then partially as a fashion person, a fashion studies person, and as someone less so as someone that sells vintage, since that's a profession I only am kind of involved in on the sidelines now. And then I would, and then well, not less, but like less immediate than that is like identifying as queer and identifying as punk. And I think also I would identify more strongly as a punk if I had always played music and always played in bands and been involved in that aspect of cultural production. But since I was more passive, I didn't even write zines. That kind of also shaped my willingness to like identify like as like,